So one of the big cornerstones of the English honors class at LQHS is the article of the week. Every week you're given a new article and you have from Tuesday to Tuesday to work on it. And here in these general instructions, it says that it's broken up into 4 parts. And it is key that you follow these 4 steps on different days. Don't try to do them on Monday night at 10 o'clock before the article is due, because then you're just really not going to get anything out of the process. So the very first step is to read the article. And this is really important that you do this. Pencils down, no annotation, no distraction. Just read the article or the short story, because in semester 2 we'll do some short stories. Read it without writing on it or stopping to look up words or anything like that. Just read it, get the gist. And it may often be the case that we'll have some time in class to do this, maybe 10 minutes at the end of a period when we finish everything up. We will try to make time for this in class, but don't count on it. And this very first article we're going to look at is called The Curve of Forgetting. And it talks about how the first time that you learn something, the first time you're exposed to it, you know it 100%, but within 24 hours, you lose 50 to 80% of that information, and you need to repeat it. So if you follow these steps, it's going to enforce that process. Read the article on one day, the next day, read the article and annotate it. I'm going to show you how to do that. Then the next day, do the graphic organizer associated with the assignment. And then finally later, perform the guided writing task. And the truth is, your writing at the end of this will be much better if you have allowed the information to sink into your brain over time. Finally, the goal is that on Tuesdays we will have class discussions about the articles that we're turning in. So the more familiar you are with the material, the better your performance in class will be, and the smarter everyone will think that you are. So that's a good goal. I'm not going to read all of this to you because you all know how to read, but I did just want to point out how it will be graded. Some of these assignments will actually end up being more than 25 points a week, and that's later when we get into doing different kinds of work with them. But you can look at the majority of the grade comes from reading and writing. And by reading, I mean the annotations. And the annotation is very specific. There are instructions. It's not just coloring with a highlighter. That does nothing for you. And if that's your main study tool, stop it. You have to, anytime you're writing on a text or highlighting on a text, you need to put out in the margins why you're doing that. Because when you go back to that material, you'll have no idea why your page is now a pretty color pink. You won't know why you highlighted those things. So this is how it's graded, and it's 25 points a week. So let's talk about annotation. Annotation means a lot of different things. It doesn't mean a lot of different things. It means one specific thing, which is to write on a piece of text and interact with the text. But at different sites and even at one school in different classes, annotation could mean something very specific. And none of them are wrong. I don't want you to go into your history class and say, well, no, Miss Douglas and Mr. Bowman taught us to do it this way. No. It's just that for the purpose of this assignment, we have a specific kind of annotation that we want you to do. And one thing that's not in this set of instructions that needs to be, in fact, I should probably put it right in here, is before you even start reading the article, go to the end of the article. So here's our first article. Go to the end of the article and see why you're reading. Meaning, set a purpose for the reading that you're doing. So in the case of this first article, you have this graphic organizer that you have to fill out. And you have to see if the article itself agrees with these statements. So I don't want you reading it the first time through looking for the specific evidence that shows whether or not the article agrees with that statement. But if you read these 3 statements and they're in the back of your mind while you're reading, it's going to help you direct your reading in a more purposeful manner so that you don't get to the end of the page and completely forget what you just read, which I'm sure we've all done a million times before. But also, take a look at the written response instructions. Now, for the first several weeks, in fact, probably the whole first quarter, you'll be doing template writing, where we've given you this template. I know it looks a little confusing. It's a little bit better on your packet. We've given you this template to fill out. So basically, this is what's called a summarize and response, where you say the argument made by so-and-so is this, here's how it's supported. And then in the second paragraph, you say whether you agree or disagree, and then why, and you provide evidence. So having that in the back of your head is a great way to start with your reading so that you have a purpose. So let's go back to looking at how to annotate. So the annotation for the article of the week comes in 4 steps. And the first is making connections. So you have to make 5 connections to the text. There's 3 different types. You have to do 1 of each type. And then the other remaining 2 are of your choosing. So we've divided these up into text to world, text to self, and text to text. So you're being given copies of all these documents, but here's this one, which does a really good job of explaining the text to self, text to text, and text to world. So a text to self connection is a personal connection to a piece of reading or whatever text we're looking at. Remember that a text can be an article, a story, a poem, a song, a movie, a picture, a painting, a radio broadcast, any of those things. So in the case of the article of the week, though, most of the time it will be a nonfiction newspaper or magazine article. So text-to-self connections are very personal connections that a reader makes between a piece of reading material and the reader's own experiences or life. So an example of that would be, very simply, this story reminds me of a vacation we took to my grandfather's farm. Or when I read articles about the Rio Olympics that just happened this summer, the text to self connection for me is that I get kind of sad because I remember the Summer Olympics of my childhood and how excited they made me, and how the Rio Olympics, with all of its corruption and environmental damage, it's just not the same, and growing up sucks. So to find those kinds of connections to self in your reading, you can look at these kinds of questions. Something like this happened to me. Is this different from my life? What are my feelings? Like, just go with your gut on this one. What's your emotional response to the text? And not the text in general. It's to a specific sentence or chunk of text in your article. And we'll come back to that. A text-to-text connection seems pretty obvious, right? It's a connection between something else you've read or learned through television, movies, magazines, newspapers, podcasts, a piece of art, any other type of text. And this is one of the best connections you can make. If you can connect up 2 pieces of text in your mind, you're really doing some heavy cognitive lifting, and that's awesome. So an example of this is it's down here at the bottom. This character has the same problem that I read about in a story last year. Or I saw a program on television that talked about things described in this article. Those are really simple, and I would encourage you to go beyond that. So if we're reading an article, this first article, The Curve of Forgetting, Perhaps you've read other articles about good ways to study or how the brain functions. Connect back to those. And we're not expecting you to have, citation information for those things that you saw in the past, but be a little bit more specific than, oh, this reminds me of that thing I saw. Be very specific in your connections because that will deepen the meaning for you. And then finally, a text-to-world connection is when the text that you're reading or engaging with connects to the world at large, which frankly, that's the main reason we're having you read these articles of the week. They're all mainly current event articles and things that we want you to be aware of that are going on in your life. So here it says, this article reminds me of how there are so many starving children in Africa. Again, that's very simple, but I think it helps convey what we're looking for. And then here's some questions to help you facilitate that. So those are the 3 different types of connections that you'll make in your annotation. And I'm going to come back in the next example, next video, and show you how to use these connections.